Specifically, I want to talk about passion in a certain way, and I'm not talking about ordinary passion, and I'm not talking about sensual passion, although that is in my mind, a splendid subject, at least for activity, if not for talk, but about a certain kind of passion. And it has to do with the fact of a certain lack of specific passion that has been inherent purposefully in what I have been doing up until now. And I've been making jokes, I've been making veiled threats, and I've been making some threats that were unveiled. But I want you to try and see specifically having to do with the circuitry within man, a kind of new level wrap-up, the EC gate, and several other areas I have mentioned. Now, you recall my old drawing of the nervous system, wherein that being the brain itself, and me drawing the level of consciousness. And I have once or twice or three times mentioned to you that in a sense that line could be described as having a certain kind of volume to it, even though it does not literally exist in the brain itself such as a line. But the reality of it is there, and I have mentioned that in a sense there was a kind of elasticity, that it was not simply a static line, that there was a level of consciousness of all of humanity at any given time wherein all possibilities of consciousness, speaking in toto for humanity, would exist. And so I'm going to change it just a little bit and draw it thusly and refer to it as the channel of consciousness. And specifically having to do with this, I'm going to try and get you to see something and then to feel it, because you've already felt it, you've never had a name for it, and it has to do with the tempo and the temperature of consciousness. And it has to do specifically with what is going on inside of this channel. Let me try one more time. I know that it's not easy for me just to sit here and for you to have an immediate picture. But the other sub-drawings that I have done in the past for specific reasons, such as drawing the circuits, if you recall the three interlinked circles here, it does not exist in 2 or even 3 dimensions, because where the 3 circuits actually connect would be where all of them touch the channel. So it is not in a 2-dimensional line up and down, it is not even in a 3-dimensional. This channel of consciousness is true on a multitude of levels. It would be true for this particular, or any particular country. Ours is not necessarily the greatest example because we have such a diversity, which is part of the strength, and it's part of the use that life has made of this part of the world and its body right now. But in sub-levels you would have major religions, that is, of a certain, any individual, no matter where they lived, if their primary sense of orientation was around their religion, another person that might be around a chauvinistic sense of nationality, the kinds that just immediately insist, I am a Bulgarian, and there is nothing like it. You know, when I die, I hope I come back to Bucharest. And someone else would feel family, and etc. So there is a level, a channel at which, within which people feel a sense of identity. What I'm getting to right now is to the individual level, that there is this channel wherein there is a certain latitude. But this latitude is controlled absolutely by tempo/temperature. But I want to remind you, or to at least point out to you, that in a similar sense that you can use energy and mass as being synonymous, as just being in different states or conditions, temperature equals tempo. It is a molecular agitation. I have skirted around off and on numerous times in the last year or so about tempo. If you recall, I had you do several tasks, and for you to try and observe within yourself that there was a natural tempo at which you seemed to operate, a certain tempo at which you seemed to move, at which your mind seemed to work, at which you seemed to so-called emotionally respond to what was going on. It is synonymous with temperature, but there's a reason I am using both terms of tempo / temperature of this channel of consciousness, to give you two different ways to approach it. It is already arbitrarily hardwired into everyone what is normally referred to as their consciousness, their sense of I, which, let me remind you one more time, this channel is not, the level of consciousness is not simply resting in the brain itself. That is, it is not resting on the yellow circuit. It has equal access, or as they say nowadays, is equally accessed by the three circuits. Unless you change the tempo, unless you increase it, unless you raise the heat in the channel, there is no such thing as change. Now, in a sense, in a very real and particular sense, I have been, and what I have seemed to be, and what I have seemed to be trying to get you to look at, the way in which I have seemed to talk, has been, let us say, sans a certain kind of ordinary passion, especially what many people would have expected in some sort of so-called spiritual activity. Now, some of you, still sitting here, were mechanically attracted to it when you first ran across me, particularly in person, but even from some of the public writings. But that I seem to be somewhat, remember I'm speaking now of a kind of mechanical affinity that you seem to have felt for me, in the way in which I acted, that I seem to be not necessarily encaptured by some kind of wild-eyed passion hollering about gods and spirits, and yet I seem to have a certain kind of self-control, and I seem to be fairly sophisticated and intelligent. So some of you were mechanically attracted to it, which is all right, but it's meaningless. Speaking as a whole about passion, I could make up quite properly several equations or little scientific notations of passion equals interest times intensity. And without a certain kind of passion, even though I'm referring to something out of the ordinary, taken at the most mundane level, without a certain kind of passion, nothing happens. You would not stay alive without a certain kind of passion being primarily fed, let me say, from the red circuit. You would not have the passion to defend yourself. And I don't mean just from a fist fight, from a potential mugging on the street. Your body would not have the vigor, it would not have the muscular tenor and health to even defend itself from the ordinary multitude of little microscopic organisms that I am informed inhabit us one and all. And when it gets into the blue circuit, no matter that many people feel arbitrarily wired up in such a way that your ordinary voices would say that you are very inclined, beyond any point of profitability, that you're very inclined to take things personally, that if someone just lowers an eyebrow, that you will go away and you are inclined to cry and feel hurt. Notwithstanding the apparent validity of that kind of observation, I point out to you that there is a kind of passion involved, taking the example I just made, that many people would relate, that there still has to be a certain kind of passion involved, even if they feel they're primarily being mistreated by life and other people. There's still a kind of passion involved for them to withstand that apparent onslaught. When it gets into the yellow circuitry, you have, as always, a more difficult example for me to present tangible paradigms and examples. The primary one being simply people disagreeing with your opinion. There being this apparent intellectual running dialogue between Catholics and Protestants, liberals and conservatives, right and left wing, those from the north, those from the south, those from the east against those from the west, and the green people against the purple people, those in favor of centralized government and those in favor of diversified government. There is a passion, it is harder to describe, but by now all of you should have some passing sense of it, that there is that mechanically wired up response in you, even though heretofore you may not have considered yourself particularly an intellectual sort, for you to simply state an opinion, or for you to state something that seems to be a fact. Somebody starts discussing art, and you thought that you had read in Time magazine this week, it comes up and you try to come into conversation, that there is a brand new traveling show of the French Impressionists now in New York and setting all sorts of records for attendance. And someone else, without a great deal of rancor, says, no, you're wrong. It's the German Expressionist that you're thinking about. And everything in you that brought up that memory says, no, that's not true. And the person gives you a look and kind of smiles, that look that they are absolutely convinced that they're right, and they may be. And of course, ordinary people, what that makes you want to do is what? Defend yourself. Or to get out of the room, which is the same thing. So you can say in a fairly crude manner that the yellow circuit does have a kind of passion to defend itself. That my ideas, my philosophy on religion, on economics, on politics, is a better one than is being espoused by my learned opponent over here. Within this channel of consciousness, based upon the tempo/temperature within each person, is set up absolute perimeters. If you thought about consciousness as waves, particles flowing through, let's leave it at waves, that it is absolutely controlled. Now all of these little tasks and the things I mentioned before, I'm going to try to push you closer up to the simplicity of it, that I've given you every occasion, and I'm insisting that you should take advantage of the occasion to see that left to your own devices, no matter what seems to happen in life, bad luck, good luck, you hear that a family member is sick, you hear that your grandmother died, then there's 2 weeks of nothing but blanket boredom. There is a channel. There are absolute perimeters within which you feel passion. In everyone's life, there seems to be accidental moments, and no one gives them any particular regard except I am now, wherein you have an experience. Maybe you got mugged, or at least everyone probably has almost been hit by an automobile, that you're driving along minding your own sacred business, and some fool suddenly whips out and runs a stop sign, and your feeling, your passion toward it, let us say quite correctly so, is I almost was seriously injured. All of you know that feeling. It is out of the ordinary. But it takes something absolutely out of the ordinary to change the tempo, to change the temperature inside the channel of consciousness. I have insisted and then tried to get you to see it in your own way that there is no such thing at the ordinary level as real change in people. And I used to use examples, as you all recall, of me pointing out in what I consider to be my splendid fashion, an example that would apparently be on the surface an absolute gainsay to what I was trying to prove. That is, the reformed alcoholic, the man who was just falling down drunk, a man who just his whole life seemed to be tied around drinking, and then one day, apparently he has stopped. And not only is he no longer a drunk, he is now one of the most active members in AA. And yet I insisted to you there has been no change. Let me tell you what alters ordinary behavior. There's still no change, but behavior has been altered. Fear of great sickness, sickness itself. Let me include drinking, my example. The man begins to spit up blood. He begins to have more and more days wherein he gets up and he not only can remember what day it is, he's not even sure what month it is. He begins to beat his wife, he loses his job, he wrecks his car. And finally, it seems as though, miraculously overnight, after ending up in the emergency ward again and wrecking the third car of the year, and his license is gone and the police are waiting for him, along with the 12 months of guest rest at the county farm, and the doctor just passes by and says, by the way, it's the last time I just wanted to point out to you, if you have another drink, you'll die. A ghastly death. Your liver is probably going to explode. Have a nice day, and he leaves. All right, it's as though suddenly the man has seen the light. If you'd like me to change it from, or to carry it past drinking, those who apparently undergo a religious conversion, a man who seems to be somewhat of a ne'er-do-well, a man who seemed to have had no inclination to engage in activities that would be beneficial to himself, much less his fellow man. Then apparently he stumbles into a tent meeting, or he happens to turn on Jim and Tammy one night while taking the right kind of unnatural substances in his body, and he puts his hand on the TV, and he says, and his behavior is altered. He doesn't just say it. I have seen a whole new picture. I now feel as though I'm a different person. And he is then out on the streets, not any longer causing trouble, he is out handing out handbills and knocking on doors. These kind of unusual, insofar as the individual is concerned, activities, all the way from illness to fear of illness, have created inside the person, in that channel of consciousness, they have, and you can look at two ways, they have either turned up the heat or they have increased the tempo at which consciousness flowed through him. That is the only way that anything changes. Still, the drunk becoming a spokesman for AA, I must still point out to you, as much as I hate to, there's been no change vis-a-vis what this is involved with. But there is absolutely no doubt that there has been a drastic alteration in behavior, and it's due to one thing. It's not due to the voice of God. It's not due to the fear of death. It's not due to the fear that I don't go around the rest of my life spitting up a pint of blood a day. You know, it's socially unacceptable, and it keeps me from being invited to the right parties. It's none of that. As ordinary psychologists might want to say, and I'll go ahead and quote them, that is simply a symptom. What has altered behavior has been an increase in the temperature/tempo of consciousness. Now, let me point out an aspect that would apparently be involved with good old yellow circuit activity, of you hearing someone speak. It could be reading a book, but let us call the information as the energy, but let's call it information this time. And so I can call it something, let's call it sigma. And let's say it comes in, although it's not exactly the way things are laid out, but let's say it comes in over here. And we have sigma being some form of information comes in. Now it could be information that the person assumed or expected to be. How about the great, quote, cosmic truths? The person tracks down the most famous and intriguing guru of which they have any knowledge, or a minister, a rabbi, a learned person. And they go expecting, they're already primed from reading, from reputation, that if anyone has anything of any importance to say, it has got to be this person, and I'm going prepared for a real experience. And so the person begins to talk. In it comes, let's go back to my proverbial Fred or Mary. If there has been no change in the temperature, tempo of consciousness, sigma comes in, no matter what it seems to be. And all that comes out is sigma, and let's call it, I'll put it on men, let's call it Fi. That it is sigma that has gone through the channel of Fred's I consciousness. The simplicity, the absolute simplicity, is almost more than you can talk about. But once you see it, as I like to tell some of you now, it answers 2 or 3 boxes worth of questions that you've had laying around, except it comes out interpreted through everyone's arbitrary hardwired system as though I can never find answers. I'm continually disappointed. I continually find myself being in a position of critiquing what I have read. And it is simplicity itself. It does not matter. You go to hear gospel, cosmic truths of some kind, but if it's shit going in, it's shit coming out, as you computer people like to say. Now, it does get transformed, is why I changed sigma into something else, because everyone is continually in the operation of transforming energy. Remember me making energy a whole string of energy slash heat slash info. It is still the circulatory system of life that things are being transmitted, and it's everyone's job, mechanically. You can't escape it. To take in and transform, to send out that which has been transformed. But this channel, operating at a specific tempo and a specific temperature in everyone, you could come here forever, you could look up Swami X forever, you could read every great book ever written, and let's assume that objectively in some way, everything you ever always wanted to know about everything is in a book. Or several books. And yet all of you, I assume from looking at you, read several books before I met you. But your feeling was, the voices said, well, some of that I can agree with and some I don't. Or oftentimes, you felt delighted to have read this book because, hey, I'd been thinking the same thing. What a great book. Because it thinks the same thing, I'll recommend it to my friends. And no change occurs. Or you hear one of your friends, or you read a review that says, or an advertisement, better yet, from the man who wrote it, from the organization with a vested interest, and says, this is the book that will change your life. People, you hear other people testify, this book has changed my life, and you read it and it doesn't change your life. And I blew $9.95. But there it is. Sigma coming in, whatever it is, what you're going to come out with is sigma Fi. And it can't be otherwise. It can't be otherwise. There's no shortcut miracle. If I still insisted to you, or if I still admitted to you that there's nobody on this planet that understands any more than I do. So what? There is no shortcut magic to go around to people and say, listen, I'm going to make you hear something you've never heard. There is no such shortcut. Or if there was, it would not be profitable. This channel operating within the arbitrary limits of tempo and temperature, it does not matter what goes in. It does not matter what you read. It does not matter what you hear. Under all ordinary conditions. I shouldn't be sounding as though I'm a preacher, although some of this tonight's an act about passion, because I may get worse before the night's over and scare some of you people, and maybe not. But it is not something I should be having to tell you. I should have covered enough now that you hear some glimpse of it, that without changing this, that is, you being whatever Fred or Mary is, whatever your ordinary tempo and temperature is, it doesn't matter whether you seem, comparatively speaking, very passionate, the kind of person who says, and who seems to display the passion that I am actively in the market for all new philosophical, religious, New Age books. I devour them. I love them. Or if you're a person who seems rather non-committal, like, well, I'll read it, I do have some questions, and I'll give it a try. It doesn't matter. It's garbage in, it's garbage FI out. It does not change. There is no information, there is no energy that will come into this channel and change it. There is that which alters behavior, and it turns the drunk into a prophet of doom vis-a-vis alcohol. There is that going on. It's not that unusual. It causes people in their behavior to apparently undergo a conversion of some kind. But notice the after in my two pictures of before and after. The man who is now proclaiming the virtues of AA operates at a much more intense and a faster speed than he did the day before when he was drinking. The man who now has been apparently converted to some religion and is now, if not a prophet, a grand spokesman, an attempted converter of other people. He always, and I say always enough that you notice that the man has undergone some alteration in his behavior. He is not what he was yesterday when he was a, quote, sinner, when he was not converted to this particular god or gods. Those who are lost, those who are not part of that little religious group, compared to them, always seem a little dull, a little slow. But if you're actually converted to the point that you can observe an alteration in the person's behavior, what happens? You should know that by now. Even those of you that didn't grow up in good old Assembly of Gods and other right-thinking religions. They are passionate. Several weeks ago, I gave you that task to look at those people on TV to save you from having to go out in public. It is not a misnomer whatsoever to point out to you that it's show business. It's not an act. Those ministers of all sorts, even those that are apparently the most flamboyant, they do not close up the cameras. They don't go off in the back room and have a drink and laugh about the fools that go for this. Nay, nay. They're as serious as the crowd is. It is a heat exchange. But notice when someone apparently has been converted, when they are apparently followers of that church, there is a passion for it. And if they attempted to describe it, or if you asked them the right kind of questions, they would even admit it in that way, that my life was rather dull. I was whatever that religion calls sin, doing wrong. I watch TV all the time, which is a fair example. All of you now know there is a continuing voice coming from the body of life that poo-poos watching religion, TV. And whether it comes from the apparent mouth of sociologists, psychologists, neurologists, proctologists, well, I don't know, they can say anything they want to. But all of you know that there is this apparent social commentary decrying TV watching. And it comes out described as, well, it's turning us into a country of illiterates. No one reads great literature. It's cut down on conversation, the fine art thereof. It's cut down on the everyday communications between the family. Of course, like everything, there is a reality to it, but notice that is just one voice going on in life's body. And the voice is not yet loud enough to stop most of everybody else sitting down like a potato or a squash every night and watching TV. But what I was going to point out, it is not simply it's turning people into illiterates and etc. But let me point out that even though, remember, life's body, if it has any name, once you begin to see it, is diversion. There is no specificity to what's going on. And so for every voice, for every area of life's body decrying the watching of TV, there are more people. For every voice crying out, I'll just take a guess, I'm somewhere in the ballpark, there are 10 million people watching TV for every voice that says, my, my. But one part of life's body is denouncing a continual feeding, a continual support of that same temperature of consciousness. Because TV, there are other things, sports, some reading, but at any rate, TV watching is a fair example of sitting down there and you almost become passive to a point that is not readily available, mechanically speaking, as reading might be, unless you're reading something of which you had no interest. But it's almost as though you can sit down and whatever the temperature and the tempo of your consciousness is, you have something that's not going to disturb it whatsoever. Because it operates right in the main channel of whatever society it is producing it. I have heard TV once denounced as being bubblegum for the mind. And that is not a bad description in regard to what I'm trying to point out to you. But you can find it in other areas. Parents attacking their children for not taking any intellectual interest. People feeling, looking for enemies within themselves, that I should do more. I should go back to school. I shouldn't sit around and read true romances every night or science fiction. I know every science fiction plot that they can probably come up with. I got boxes full of them. I shouldn't keep doing this. I shouldn't sit here every night and listen to the playlist of the hottest rock station in my city 3 times a night. I sit here for 5 hours. I know them all by heart. It has no effect. But all of this is within the same realm that I'm trying to point out. Comes about from life, in part, decrying watching TV. It is a support of the general tempo and temperature of consciousness of that area. Nothing disturbing, all predictable. Now, if there's anything, once you see it, even though life is completely diversified, and things within itself are apparently, from one viewpoint, working at loggerheads, which is not an incorrect view. But also, once you begin to see that, you also see that things are very predictable. That which you always thought, that which consciousness takes, is being unpredictable. And people saying, my God, how can this happen? There are no surprises. It is almost impossible to be inflamed. The closer you get to the highest part of life's nervous system, that is, I keep using our country as this part of the world, this part of life's body as the prime example, the less likely you are to be shocked, to be surprised. It is sometimes known as being sophisticated. Wherein if you go in life's body, those of you, most of you will read will follow what I'm talking about in general by now. If you go back down in life's nervous system, they're still going on simultaneously. Right now, there are areas of the world that are just beginning to even approach the yellow circuit in life's nervous system. That is, the less civilized. And there's some fairly primitive areas still on this planet. They are easily shocked. Not down in the mines and the manufacturing and the furrows out in the fields, because that's been their primary, that's been the limitations, that's been the primary fence of their locale. And so there'd be very little you could do right there. But they would be easily shocked once you start using things in the higher circuitry of which you would be aware. They're easily surprised. But the closer you get up to where this would be in life's body itself in regard to man, everything's almost predictable. It's almost impossible to really get enraged or inflamed. I mean, it's the hour, or a few minutes I spent now with a good AM radio trying to find up on the far end of the dial. The day's almost gone. Those good old preachers, just 1 or 2 left. They can do anything at all surprising. You know, the ones that holler that about international banking conspiracy, and they start naming names. You know, the president and the pope are in some kind of conspiracy together, and they're homosexual lovers. And he starts naming names of banking families in France and Germany, and how they control the United States, and they have this great plot. That kind of thing. I mean, that kind of fun thing. They're almost impossible to find. I mean, they're still around, but they can't even afford radio anymore. Once you start getting this level, it's all predictable. I mean, you may find things, some of you may have been a little surprised at some of the fundamentalist preachers on television. I don't know, but I guess some of you might have been a little surprised. But that doesn't count, see, because there are millions and millions of people who are not surprised by that they have millions and millions of followers. Or if some of you had no knowledge of the Catholic faith or something else, and you went and you saw Mass for the first time, you saw this hocus pocus, you might find it rather surprising if you grew up in an Assembly of God, or the down-home church of George Jones or somebody. You might be kind of surprised at that, but see, that doesn't count, because there are billions of people who are not surprised. The tempo and the temperature of your consciousness is your sophistication. It's the limit of what you can hear. It's the limit of anything new that can happen. Now, to passion. There is no amount of so-called rational thought. There is no amount of the kind of diagrams, the kind of week in and week out, symbols, maps, 2-hour non-stop talks of me doing, as intriguing as they have been, as much as now most of you here and some of the people in the other cities getting these tapes, you would follow me anywhere. There's no doubt this is what you belonged in, and you can now apparently see and think in ways that are just more fun than anything. You know, besides giving up most of your wounds and suffering, it's just more fun than you could ever imagine. My talk did not do it. And yet, note, it has been, from a certain view, rather impassionate. I don't go around hugging all of you people. I don't even encourage you to do it. We don't all call each other every day. We don't all tell each other, boy, I love you, you're my best friend. If any of you had any inclination, chances are you'd make sure I wasn't around, because you just feel like that I might disapprove in some way. You just wouldn't want to do it. It just seems that there's been lacking a certain kind of passion. Wrong. And I don't mean it was just one way. But there is no amount of so-called rational information, no matter how irrational it was, that I had to walk this thin line, and many times it sounded as though, well, I'm talking about things that, yes, I've already thought about that. How wonderful it is to find a man who can speak like he can, and it supports many of my previous views. And then all of a sudden I took a step right out to the edge wherein we all may fall off, you thought. Or if I get out there, I can't come back. It was not simply in some way a yellow circuit endeavor, nor is it now. This is all getting somewhere of a practical nature. Without a certain kind of heat, without a certain kind of passion, this reaches a dead end. I keep threatening, and it's getting very close to being upon us, which coincidentally, surprisingly so, is going to mesh right in with us doing something publicly, or me stopping this once and for all. But now we get to the kinds of so-called questions that I have been presenting to you in all sorts of manners, hidden under tricks, presented as rhetorical questions. But there comes a time, which is not necessarily upon any of you individually, but since I'm the one running the show, since I'm the one who's understood what's going on and still do, it has reached the time, sort of, getting very close, of taking everything in consideration. You people, which is my primary responsibility, the people in other cities are getting these tapes, people in other cities that write me, more indirectly people that have read something that I had written and dropped me notes, or just sitting around now even daydreaming about it. There comes a point that it must go in a different direction. And it has to become, in a sense, passionate, but in a very specific way. Let me note for you a little more distinctly what passes for all forms of religion. And there are, of course, variations within that spectrum. The Unitarians, the Episcopalians, all the way from that to a good sawdust Alabama preacher out handling snakes, healing people, laying dead bodies up for 2 or 3 days at a time until the health service getting them, expecting them to bring them back to life, not excluding all the so-called cults, all the would-be mystics of every stripe, every description. if they seem to amount to anything, that is, you've ever heard of them, and they seem to be having some kind of effect, there is a apparent, I mean, you just observe it, whether you ever call it that or not, there is a kind of passion to it. To go with inside that spectrum, even though I included them, of all the so-called major denominations in the most sophisticated part of the planet, that is the place where the tempo and the temperature is at the mechanical maximum within the channel of life's own consciousness, vis-a-vis man, I was going to throw in, since I mentioned the Unitarians. But please note, those of you, I'm not trying to give you a lesson on this, I assume many of you know, they have buildings, they've been around for several hundred years, but they don't go anywhere because it's not really a passionate religion. Now, I could throw in a few other examples, but I'm going to leave some of this that you ought to be able to neuralize some of this on your own. That which seems to have the most passionate followers are those teachings, those ideas, just a leader. If it just seems to be based around some swami or some guru, there seems to be a passionate interplay, a heat exchange. Now, of course, it's normally called love. As you know, the gods love me, the gods love all of us. You people just don't know the mysterious wonder of the gods' love. Because I'm one of the chosen ones, and the gods, I don't know whether they love me more than you people, but they let me know it more. And they told me to tell you, isn't that wonderful? Yes. Isn't that great? Yes. Clap your hands. Yes. Heil Hitler. You're in the same ball game. But there is a passion to it. No passion, no change whatsoever. And if people do not feel that they have been changed in some manner, they will have no passion for it. They will not continue to go. And it doesn't have to be a kind of so-called life-shattering conversion. But they must feel as though there has been a change. It's not the words they would use, but the ones I'm using now. They would have to feel as though I have been heated up, or the tempo at which I live and think and feel has been increased. That is the passion. Now, one way it's produced, again, I remind you, it is not a plot. The people do not know what they're doing. It's life doing it for its own reasons. It operates in as you should observe, in various ways. That it does take all kinds, or there wouldn't be all kinds. But a part of this passion among apparent religious groups is, if I may coin a new term, yes you may, instead of busy work, is busy passion. And you might note, since I'm about to note it for you, that I have never engaged in that, and I'll describe it, or I'll give you an example. It is prime example, the prime example in all religions, all would-be cults, is the conjuring up by the leader, or the leadership in some way, the specter of enemies. Of course, at the most fundamental level, you know, it's evil spirits, devils and Satans. But then in the more so-called enlightened, sophisticated cults and groups, it's not just devils and Satans, it's the government. It's our neighbors. Here we are trying to do what's right. Here we are trying to bring humanity into a brand new age of some kind of cosmic tulip consciousness and love for one another, and these motherfuckers next door are trying to get our house rezoned to get us thrown out, and us trying to do good work, what we should do. In fact, after the meeting tonight, we'll all get together and find out who can handle dynamite. The continual raising of a specter of an enemy creates this kind of busy passion. It's us against them. It's the preachers, back to a very visible example on radio and in television, is you people have got to send money. You've got to support us, because the networks, being driven by evil forces, they want us off the air. They keep increasing what they charge us weekly for our program. The faster I pay for it, the more they increase it. You've got to send us money. They want to shut me up. That great ungodly communist conspiracy, they're trying to shut up moi. You got to help me. There are enemies everywhere. That creates busy passion. Who's going to stand with this great work we're doing to fight off the ungodly communists, to fight off the banking conspiracy, to fight off Religion X? Who's going to stand with me in what's right? And they holler, I will, I will. There's a feeling. There's a passion to it. Now the question becomes, as I present it to you, because that is the way it becomes, is what can be done? Now, I've asked you people this rhetorically, and we've had some little committees set up, and even those of you who have been here the least amount of time, you know that there has been peaks and valleys of me talking about this over the last several years and threatening that was getting very close to something having to occur. Some of you do not have any particular interest in being involved with, when I say, all right, some of you set up committees and give me your suggestions, now that you've been here 6 months or a year, based upon what you've been through, based upon just mechanical, what seemed to have attracted you to this in the first few months, what you, just looking back now, seemed to have mechanically held you here. If I suddenly turned to you and said, all right, we're going to have to start doing something publicly. This never just stops here. It's just not my choice. And I'm going to leave it to you. You tell me how we're going to attract not only the most people, but the most people that would possibly get some real benefit from this, just based upon now what you understand of having gone through this for the last 6 months, the last 3 years. It's up to you. You bring me a report in a week. Now, there are many of you in here that have no interest in that. I understand that totally. I've never gone back when I've given these tasks, if you note, and come back to you and say, your idea was just shipshod, or your idea was almost nothing. Some of you have no interest in it, and that's no problem. I understand that. And you'll be quite willing to leave it to me, or if I said, all right, everybody on this side of the room that's interested, come up with a plan, and if it's reasonable, we'll just use it. It'll be as good as anything I could do. Some of you would just have no interest, and you'd be just quite delighted if somebody else would decide. Within that same context, there have been smaller groups of people. It's no secret that I have been specifically giving the task of, I want you to try and consider specifically the areas of advertising, or the areas of the political, economic, social strata of this area, if I'm going to stay here and start this. Who, based upon education, economic factors, who, based upon what you understand now, what you've gotten from this, and the way in which I've done it, what group would you say we should target? Now turn to other people and ask them to consider other things, specific economic ramifications of us starting it. I have had by now, it shouldn't be any secret even to those of you involved, after all of this, I have had turned in and told to me almost every possibility that exists in a three-dimensional world, which is as it should be. But I also note, and some of you have, sort of indirectly, those of you who gave it your most serious attention, or some of you when I turned to you and I gave you at least a nonverbal message that this is important and I'm turning this segment over to you. I picked out you group of people for my own reasons. That no matter what you came up with, there's still lacking a certain amount of passion to it. You might have put another way that I like this compared to the other things we considered. It seems the best way we could go. Some weeks back, I asked you the rhetorical question, and those of you who believe that you have been seriously involved with working on this, and I just leave it to you, some of you have been more directly involved in the last few weeks, months of planning. The sorts of things that I have had done, allowed to be done, the Evotech meetings, the skits, the writings, the readings of ideas, poetry, music that we have had done on the several occasions that we had these ephemeral series of public meetings. Are any of you positive that that's the way it should be done? Most of you now have had occasion, I won't give you an explanation about what I was involved with or how much effort I put forward, but most of you have now, over the last 2 years, had occasion to see me go to some other city where there's a group of people thought they were interested, and you saw me show up and take a shower and put on a shirt and tie and come out and talk to those people. And all of you should have some occasion now, without being a critic, to notice what seemed to be the general overall effect. Did, 300 people show up in L.A. and listen to me talk, and did suddenly 300 people write me? Did they show up here at the door? Did the whole crowd stand up in unison and look at each other like a tacit signal, say, this is it, this is it? I hear it, I don't understand all, but I heard it, this is it. What you people have been through, what you have gotten from this personally, cannot in the same way be transferred. It cannot be transformed, and in some way, with a new name put on it, change the environment, just change the presentation piecemeal, or for me to even turn it over to you and say, now the attraction is based upon what you understand. What I attempted to get some of you to look at once in the last several weeks, because it's not linear, and I didn't want anybody to choke on it, but in one sense, those of you now who have the nervous system activated anywhere above that line level of consciousness, in a sense, now some of you individually, or some of you individually collected together, should be able to have a different appeal than I would under most circumstances. And we're disregarding all sorts of things of me putting on some kind of act and doing something specific. But there is a way in which you can feel what is involved in a more immediate way than I would without putting forth some kind of great effort, which is not really my responsibility anymore. But still I'm asking, are any of you convinced that you know what to do? The best plan, the best ideas you've had, whether you relate them to me or anybody else, just the picture of how this should go. You really feel any great passion for it? Does it just strike you without a doubt that if we did something, we advertised and we're in a big place and said, finally here is so-and-so, call it anything you want to, some fancy description, free beer and sex afterwards, so that you get a good crowd turnout. Do any of you have any sort of passionate assurance, using your own devices, dragging me into it, you advise me, here's what we'd like to see you do. Do any of you have any passionate assurity that would do anything? The answer is 9. Also, within the last several months, do you recall that I asked you a kind of rhetorical question? And I sort of made my own notation. Could any of you see that at least up until right now, the most usable, the most efficient shell has always been religion? That you can make it encompass everything, all the way from music to ordinary passion. That is, of decrying the pitiful condition of man, proclaiming whatever truth that group seemed to be involved with, that their gods have written this book, this is how we have got to align ourselves. Of course, what has been lacking up until now is why life has been talking to me in a different way, hence all such as this. In my writings, you don't see anything about God, and I don't talk about God. I've tried to explain to you or point to you in several ways where the notion comes from, the reality of it. But there has never been any direct feeding of here. So let me remind you again what we covered just a few minutes ago, since I know it's still fresh in your little memories. It is very hard not only to describe, but to produce a reality that seems to be a yellow circuit passion. You cannot reason with people to get them passionate. Contraire, again, the simplicity. psychologists, philosophers, trying to go back and analyze some of the fanatics of the last half a decade since we've had film and audio tape. But to take films of some of these so-called madmen, and they sit down and get the best translators, trying to take into consideration the cultural differentiations, everything, and they analyze what this guy said, and they say it's hogwash. And he would show up, and 50,000 people would stand there, and if he farted, everybody would applaud. He could say anything and get them going. Or, same sorts of people could walk out to or turn on television, or go out to one of these fundamentalist churches and try and listen to what the guy was saying. He's shaking this book that he claims that the gods wrote, and he's sweating, he's crying, he's whooping, he's hollering, he's dancing, and he's got these whole group of people doing the same thing. And they go away and they coldly analyze what he said, and it's just meaningless. I'm them trying to take, as they might say, an objective, scientific view, and now we have written it out, and it's meaningless. How could anyone get passionate about this? And, of course, they're almost right. But also note another little gremlin. Whether you have ever had occasion to think about it in these words, all of you to varying degrees have apparently gotten so much out of your involvement with this, and so much of it seems to be up here, that if you did not think about it in a certain way, if you did not view it in the way in which I have just described, or in some manner quite similar, the feeling sneaks upon you that the very ideas, if we just took, what have we got now, 10,000 pages of transcripts of me talking week after week, and we distilled it in some way into the little Jan Bible, or the great truth in some outline, and then a dictionary, a glossary describing these terms, and all that it is so, in a sense, overwhelming, but then it is so simplistic that the thing itself is just exciting. But we're not talking about sigma. So we're talking about what happened inside of you. Now, you're correct. The information, the descriptions I've given, the maps, are absolutely astounding. They're out of time. They're anachronistic in that direction, if that can be true. And I have even, for various reasons, as you noted, have paralleled them with such areas as particle physics. I have given specific examples where I might have been describing it almost in a scientific way and then giving you something to do or a way to look at it. And any of you who have been attempting to heat up, to increase the tempo here, anyone who has gotten anything out of this, you have found that everything I have described, to put it shorthand, is true. As irrational as it was, and then once you taste it, as I've admitted, and many of you now have the experience, you understand why many times I'd say, no, wait, this is not literally true, and this is not literally what happens. And then you begin to see it yourself, and you understand it was not some kind of self-protecting caveat I was giving. That, yeah, you're right, that's not exactly what it is, but, you know, hell, I couldn't explain it either. And, of course, about the best you can say is your thing to me like was a damn good effort. The tasting, the personal experience of it, was not simply limited to, as astounding as it is, as irrational as it is, as free jazz as it is, and me making it partially palatable at given periods of time to some of you. It is not simply the information coming in. It is not simply the miracle of my speech. That what I have described is so astounding that if more people heard it, assuming they had any intelligence whatsoever, they would just be floored by it. They would just say, I want to hear more. Do not be too sure. You have had some occasion to observe otherwise. When I speak about religion, or when I've continued to make the jokes about starting our fake church, consider some of the possibilities that have been thrown around in some of the groups you people have been meeting together, and I have brought up some of them here. You have been involved with some of them, such as those evil tech meetings. I just turned it over to you. As enjoyable as it was, as much as you got from it, look at the kind of crowd you got. Look at the numbers. Look at the quality of the people, that is, whether they, not forget as much as they enjoyed it, how many people, as many of you expected, how many enjoyed it, wanted to know when the next meeting was, came back, how many finally said, I suspect a great, important effort here involved. You people are not just putting on a show, and by God, I won't be part of it, or I'm going to cut somebody. Oh, sure, you had a few people that said, if you're ever having one of these meetings, maybe I'll leave my name and address if you don't call after 10 at night. Let me ask again. You remember the little task I gave for you people to try and neuralize and even put into words on your own? What is it that throughout the ages up until contemporary times, what purpose is it that religion seems to be serving? Just without being a critique, without trying to particularly analyze it from any position, from any religious position, just across the board, what is it that religion seems to have been serving in the life of man? Now let me ask you, not only religion, but based upon all considerations, all possibilities that you people have dreamed up, which I'm telling you have about covered all three-dimensional possibilities. What can I try and neuralize and even put into words on your own? What is it that throughout the ages up until contemporary times, what purpose is it that religion seems to be serving? Just without being a critique, without trying to particularly analyze it from any position, from any religious position, just across the board, what is it that religion seems to have been serving in the life of man? Now let me ask you, not only religion, but based upon all considerations, all possibilities that you people have dreamed up, which I'm telling you have about covered all three-dimensional possibilities. What can actually be done other than to disturb the complacent or disturb the placid and then placate the disturbed? Maybe startle the comfortable, and then comfort those who are startled. Can anyone find any egress? Can anyone find any trap door, any secret closet that does not cover? You can start off with all ordinary religions, but now I'm asking you for this to go outside, of what has been done between you and me. I mean, it's not going to be repeated. It's not going much further in this simple direction. But what is it, with the best of possibilities, with the best of intentions you've had, or to try to imagine the most flamboyant, the most aggressive, the most surprising thing that I might say, all right, here's what we're going to do. Enough of you people fooling around, here's what we're going to do. Jump on board or chow? What can actually be done other than you can disturb the placid, and then you can placate the disturbed? anyone see a connection between the EC gate I have described for you? But in all cases wherein my present little slogan that I just gave you, I guess that's as good as any for the night, to either disturb the placid or not either. Our motto could be to disturb the placid and to placate the disturbed. They are both passionate endeavors. One is the attempt to ignite those who are currently smug, maybe smug-bored, and then to calm those, to attempt to placate those who are already mechanically disturbed by being alive, the real walking wounded. What else is possible? Assuming for the sake of my present mapping that is all that's possible, somewhere within that description. Neither of those two things that have always been necessary in religion, of disturbing the comfortable and then of comforting the disturbed, you cannot do it with rationale, you cannot do it with logic, you cannot do it with drawings, you cannot do it by astounding monologues. There has to be a passion to it. I started out noting for you that the passion I was going to refer to in the main tonight was not ordinary passion. And by that, I am including that which you would observe in any ordinary religious, pseudo-religious, would-be mystical context. Is that passion does not create, that is, not outside the mechanical realms of what is going on in life's body at that time and place, it does not create a sufficient increase in the tempo or the temperature of the consciousness, the channel of consciousness of those involved, because they do not have a leader that understands it. And so everyone gets what they need. But there is not the ability to increase the tempo or the temperature to the point to change, to expand the channel of consciousness. Now, the people may apparently be placid in their position of being a follower of that particular religion or philosophy. But now what if you gave people real sincere, fake passion, which they can't do? That these people that you've seen on television, they're calling up everyone who's crippled, everyone who is dying of something. Get in line. If you believe that God can heal you, that I am simply a humble instrument. But I'll do the best I can. Who all believes? And the organ plays and the drum goes. If you believe it, come up here. Now, from certain ordinary viewpoints, as astounding, or as they call it, miraculous, as some of that seems, that sure enough, somebody came up out of the audience on I started to say a crane, but I guess I meant a cane, that was it. Well, since A. Allen died, no one has a tent big enough to bring people in on cranes and bulldozers. Rest his soul in hillbilly heaven. As miraculous as it appears that someone came up, assuming they were not a shill, and they throw down their cane, and they say, I haven't walked in 2 years, and the man says, run, damn it. And they run, and they hoop, and they holler, and it seems to be a miraculous change. And there would seem to be real passion involved. Well, I'm going through all this, as you know, is not for any sort of critique. There's nothing funny about what's going on. But that is mechanical. As astounding as it can appear to be in isolated or in expanded situations. But the man can apparently get there and talk about the gods and sweat and pull his tie down and sing and cry and have hundreds of people there, thousands, crying along with him. And then him holler, "Praise be to our gods. They'll finally bring us out of this." And thousands of people say, "I'm with you." That is not passion. If it was real passion, it would expand this channel. It would do that, which all of you are involved with. No matter what you call it or to what degree you still think you do not understand it. It's what this is about. And it would be going on everywhere. And it's not. It is not the passion I'm speaking of. And that's why I was saying, can you, if everyone has now not lost your place, but now you're supposed to be good at this, right? What if you gave them real, sincere, fake passion? It would not necessarily resemble that which many of you have suggested that we do, that probably more of you have expected in some way that I will do. That surely this will be somewhat reasonable, surely we will appeal to the higher realms of the contemporary community, wherever we are, of their intelligence. I mean, it is all so beautifully rational once you get past the point of realizing that this is all entirely irrational. And it goes into another dimension, whereas everything you believed, at least yellow circuit, no, it's just gone. To admire the beautiful pictures of how this might be. Are you sure? I ask you again, what can be done once we get past the point of you and I in this room and the few people in these other cities that have been as seriously engaged with this as is possible from afar? What can be done besides disturbing the placid and placating the disturbed? What else can be done? What else will life allow? What else is it that people actually want? That's not to deny that there would be something else available, or else even the possibility that I am hinting to you of something that would be surprising to most of you, the public approach. It would be an absolute waste of time were there not another possibility. That is, there's something else going on there at the fake church. But if any of you still believe that just simply because it is now so astoundingly clear to you on a good day, and what seems to be at times a real passionate joy, that you just like to grab me and hug me if people did such things, that sometimes the little thoughts you have, these things that, you know, I try to call stratograms and all that stuff, it's just at times you just turn around, you know, sometimes I call it see things. It just happens. You don't need the term anymore, and it's just, you know, it's almost as good as sex, which is a poor comparison. I should drop that little joke. You just don't know what to call it. It's so much fun that, you know, all you want, you can get in a closet and shuffle your feet, you know, bang on the wall. But that is not simply an intellectual, it is not simply a yellow circuit process. And what I'm trying to hint to you most strongly to believe, that it's really the sigma. Just because I have been able to say this, because I have been able to describe, to detail, to week after week, when I've got some kind of slightly out of the ordinary level of temperature or tempo in you, that apparently week after week that I can keep coming up with that which seems to be just ever and ever further and further out, and yes, it's connected with everything, and it becomes more and more simplistic. Don't lay all the credit here. Of course, that's the beginning of the credit. You know, if I didn't get that from somewhere, hell, we would all be members of the Assembly of God, or we would all be carrying my picture around your pocket. How's it to be a famous spiritual leader and you can't even bend over? The beginning of it is astounding. And I'm not the beginning of it. It's astounding. But just any belief that you still have, that in some way through my miraculous ability and now perhaps joining forces with all of you people, we can in some fairly reasonable, respectable, high class way present this, and there are going to be hundreds and then thousands of people show up and just sit there maybe once or twice and suddenly go, oh my God, it was right before me all the time. Where do I sign up? How can I help? This is not all rhetorical. It is not all laid to speculation on your part, because most of you have been through some occasions now. Are you sure that's true? What can be done outside this room, outside the level at which I've operated, other than to disturb the placid and to placate the disturbed? What else can be done? What else is possible on the surface? What else is possible when you start dealing or can even attract larger numbers of people? I've got a task. I didn't lay up on all of this tonight about this diagram. But as you noticed, some of you should have, even in the last few weeks, I have cut down on some of the detailing. Maybe you thought it was just your hearing, or maybe you thought I was in a hurry. Maybe some of you had voices that thought I was running out of something to say. But if you've noticed, now that I mention it, hey, for one thing, I hadn't even talked as long for the last 2 or 3 weeks. But at any rate, there is a way to specifically use this, and you have to. It is getting to the point, not just necessarily individually, but taking you people as a whole, which is what I've got to deal with, that if you don't discover, if you don't hear the reality and use this task, I'm going to give you one more, to see the absolute scientific, if you'd like it that way, validity of what I'm saying, that if you do not increase the temperature or the tempo of that literal channel of consciousness, you're not going anywhere. And you're not going much further than where you are now, and it's not simply your fault, it's that I've got to change the direction of this ball game. When I give you the task, I assume that I'll hear several giggles and etc., because you have been on the edge of this before. I almost gave you one exactly like this. For the next week, every day, 3 times a day, I want you to move physically at an increased tempo. All you got to do is do it enough that you know that you did it. That if you're walking in to Kmart, either on business or daydreaming, not shoplifting, window shopping, I didn't mean shoplifting. That whatever the occasion, you have got to be aware of the fact, of all these things that ordinary people would call psychological ramifications and etc. Fuck all that. It's simple. Be aware of the fact, there he is, you hit Kmart, your system, within the limits of this, is taking in all possible information. It always has been. Of who might be looking at you. Is there a woman over here, if you're a man, in extremely short shorts? Is there a big old fat woman over here that reminds you of your mother who used to beat you? Suddenly, is there a cop standing there, and he seems to be looking directly at you as soon as you walk through the door? Whatever. You've got to be aware of the fact that you're moving at a certain kind of tempo. By all accounts, that seems to be you. 3 times a day for the next week. Wherever it is, whenever it strikes you, it's change that tempo. Increase it. They just suddenly start walking faster and do it just enough that, don't ask me how long, you know by now that that's not important. You've got to be aware of the fact that you specifically, that was one of the times of the day, you changed the tempo at which you moved. And with that, every day, for 3 times, I want you to speak louder and with an increase of agitation. Now, I'm not saying aggressive or hostile. Let's say you're in Kmart and you've just done the walking thing right there through the front door that you increase the tempo. Then you find yourself, maybe you don't have any interest. But to go along with the task, you walk right over and there's a camera department. Whether you got instant cameras or not, and you walk up and the person's standing there and they may be looking right at you. They may walk right and wait on you. Nobody else is there. And you walk up, perhaps you lean on the counter, and they walk up and say, could I help you? You, as you're arbitrarily wired up, the tempo and the temperature, the intensity of this channel of consciousness is such that you've simply got to be aware. Again, your whole being, all the subsystems, the infrastructures are taking in all possible information. It's not psychological, it's not sociological, it's just taking it in. You're simply aware of the fact that the person walks up. Whoever they are, whatever they are, you're still taking in information and they say, could I help you? That you would normally speak with a certain volume and a certain intensity of, well, no, thank you, I'm just looking. Or you might say, well, yes, you could. Could you show me that? Just enough that you know it will meet it, because it requires, all of you know this by now, or at least some of you dread and suspect is true, that you know that you can't use any ordinary means and satisfy whatever it is I'm after when I describe it. You know that won't work. So don't keep writing me these excuses about why I didn't do such and such. I mean, that's nice enough, I guess, if we were nice enough people, but, you know, don't bother. Don't bother to tell me why you couldn't do it or why it didn't seem to work, because all you're saying is, assuming, using ordinary conversation, that you were as sincere as an ordinary person can be, all you're saying is, I gave it my ordinary shot and I couldn't come up with what I'm just sure you wanted. Hey, don't write me. If you're going to write something unpredictable, send me a surprise. I can go home and watch TV. You're aware of the fact of the volume and the intensity at which you would respond to this man who says, may I help you? Enough to where you are aware of it. I want you to speak louder and with more intensity. Not aggression, not hostility, but you have got to change the temperature at which you speak 3 times every day. Still without feeding you baby food, something I mentioned a few weeks back and not enough of you heard it, I fear. I smell, I felt. Did I ask you, had any of you realized, I used the example of running, since all of you who are physically at all capable are supposed to be running still every day, even those that, few of you who write me notes about that you're so physically adept and you work so hard every day, shouldn't you be exempt from it? To be aware of the fact that, normally speaking, let us say that you get out and you jog, let's just call it jog, for 3 miles a day, with the same track around your neighborhood. You should also know by now, if you ever check the clock, that you probably will now, and if you do everything the same way you do every day, that you hit your right side of your driveway, as soon as you hit the sidewalk, you start. By the time you get home, day after day, week after week, you're probably within a minute of the same time every day, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I ask you to try it, and I ask you, rhetorically at least, if any of you were aware of this before, and if so, why didn't you find it very curious that you can feel tired and you're operating at the same tempo, such as jogging, that you normally do, and if you increase the tempo, that is, you start running faster, you will get over that immediacy of being tired for whatever reason. Maybe you know, maybe you got a cold, maybe you don't know, maybe you ate too much. But that is, apparently you can start exerting more effort and suddenly have more energy. And since everything is scientific, that does not make sense. And yet it's true. All you got to do is try it. Do not let the simplicity throw you. If any of you have any doubt, go try that. Whatever speed you jog at every day, hit a certain point, decide tomorrow, right, when I get to the second corner, Maybe you feel as though I've hit, this is my comfortable speed. Anything more than that, and I'm not sure I could run every day. Just decide, all right, when I get up to the red schoolhouse, or when I get to the second corner where I turn, I'm going to increase my strides, I'm going to pick it up. Just enough to where I know it. That's all that's necessary. And you do that, and simply be aware of the fact that you will suddenly have a burst of energy by putting forth more effort, which would make old man Fig Newton, I'm sorry, Professor Newton would make him roll over in his grave, because that belies, some of the so-called basic principles of pre-quantum physics. And yet you do it, and it's true, outside of what would appear to be the strictly physical realm. That some of you, I've given you specific things before, and I've given you a couple of general tasks that I did not describe to any great degree, to have you go out and to change the tempo, you remember, of the way in which you operated under specific conditions. You can bring up and bring forth a kind of, let's call it fake, because you're doing it because I told you to, of a kind of verve. And it will do something. Forget good or bad, of course. But you find yourself, you're looking for a certain book, and you're in a mall. There's 2 or 3 bookstores, and you start going to them, to be aware of the fact that there is a temperature at which you speak, and also a tempo that you would normally, you're just aware of the fact. You get to the little doors in each of the stores of the malls, and if you got somebody's attention, they'd look and you'd say, do you have such and such book? They'd say, no, I never heard of it. Thanks a lot. And you'd stroll on down to the next one, and you'd say, do you have such and such book? And you stroll along, and everything seems fine. It is you in operation. You're at the right temperature, you're at the right tempo. Now we have left to take the ordinary mind's division between itself and its so-called body. That is, between, apparently, as it wants to call it, psychological and physiological areas, get into what it would call the psychological area. The same way that I'm telling you, you can increase the tempo at which you're running, and immediately you will feel infused with new energy, which makes no sense with the ordinary laws of physics. You can change the volume, the intensity at which you speak to present a kind of verve that does not exist in your ordinary channel, and you can heat it up, and something happens, something quite real. However it is that you would speak is bring up and forth a kind of passion, just a fake passion. Of course, as some of you suspect, fake passion, calling it that from the ordinary viewpoint, is the strongest kind. Because anything else that is passion comes from the same arbitrary, absolute, stagnant perimeters of that person's channel of consciousness. If they seem to be being passionate compared to you, it's still operating there. They can't change it. To them, it's not passionate. To them, that's the right response. Or for you to think, well, this person, every time I see them, they say, hey, how you doing? And you think, God, the person is overactive. They should take some kind of pills. Their mother fed them too many sugared cornflakes when they were a kid. And maybe you try to tell them, hey, calm down. And they say, hey, I'm calm. What do you mean I'm calm? You should know that by now. If anybody wants to criticize you at the ordinary level and they accuse you of being something, nobody's that thing you're being accused of. If they say, hey, you talk too loud, you're too active. And if a person tells you that, and that's the way you appear to them, whether you respond or not, your feeling, if you gave it any notice at all, you're going to look and think, well, all right, I guess I can see that because you're such a sloth. I mean, you're so dull. Now, I guess a statue of Andrew Jackson would be the life of the party compared to you. I can see why you'd say that. And so neither person is either passionate or dispassionate. But all you got to do is increase the volume and the apparent intensity 3 times a day of what you say. And then observe. Just feel it will happen immediately. you affect the very underpinnings of what seems to be I consciousness, individual consciousness, if you heat this up or if you increase the tempo of it. It happens mechanically in life, as I point out to you, illness, near misses with death. It's not something I made up, but it is something that is at the very underpinnings of consciousness, and people attempt to avoid it. The closest they get to playing around is vicariously. Since I brought it up previously and I backed away, I didn't want to get you distracted at the time, but vicariously, outside watching TV at the most passive level, is going into such things as the vicarious enjoyment of sports, the watching of movies, whether they be on television or out in public, that seem to get right at the point that you almost cannot stand the intensity, which is pretty hard. I guess from my reading, it's these splatter movies, or these horror movies of Halloween and Friday the 13th and chainsaw murderers. But most of you now have probably seen all those, and probably the only people that scare us anymore are 13-year-old boys and girls. That seems to be the heart of that intrigue. And yet people won't. There's that feeling that I would like to really be thrilled and shocked. I mean, not enough to shock and thrill me, but, you know, just... Alcohol gives a little taste of that to many people, as I've tried to point out to you, that man go in a bar after work, have a couple of drinks, and he can suddenly turn around to the little girl in the short skirt waiting on tables, and he can say, "Boy, you got some nice looking legs." And there seems to be a little thrill, wherein if he was sober, he would never said that. Now, he may have turned and looked, but he would have never. 4 ounces of alcohol in 20 minutes makes him turn around. He says, "What you doing later?" You know, she said, "Well, nothing, big boy. What are you doing later?" That'd probably be the end of it. You know, his wife's waiting, supper's ready. But it's sort of like watching a movie for a minute, something a little thrilling. Except nobody wants to be really thrilled. Nobody wants the unpredictable. He's supposed to say, "Boy, you're some looker. I bet guys really after you." And she smiles, and he says, "What are you doing later?" And she's supposed to say, "I'm married," or "I'm sorry, I work all night," or "I'm sorry, I can't date the guest," or the client, you know, the patrons. And he goes, "Oh, well," makes a face like, "Tut, tut, tut." But that was the predictable. The unpredictable would her to be suddenly rush up and put her leg on his thigh and said, "Why, nothing, I'll quit my job, we'll leave right now." And him think, "My wife will kill me." There is almost no passion outside this limit available in life. There is not. I refer you, if you want me to push examples much further, I point out to you the great intrigue over people reading about the atrocities of history, the atrocities of yesterday, of people slaughtering each other. You go by on the highway and there's a leg sticking out from under an overturned car and blood, and you feel as though I am a humane person. I have very delicate sensibilities, but I believe I have to look. It's like everyone is looking for a little passion. There's something to make me excited, but it's supposed to still be within the realm of predictability. A part of the general intrigue and purpose of the shell of many forms of religion, whether it comes out as New Age groups or cults around one figure, is a kind of pushing of the passion up to the point that the crowd cannot hardly stand it. But that's always true. It's true at the Super Bowl. It's true at basketball games. It's true at the movies. But when you get into the realm of apparently dealing with changing people, of course, psychology, you're going to have to leave that, and psychiatry. When you get into the greater area, because you've got, as all of you know, the ratio of those who pursue or claim to pursue or be interested in some form of religion or spiritual activity far outnumber those who find themselves wanting to undergo analysis of some kind. So to get into the area that affects the largest segment of life's body, when you're talking about it having an effect, when you're talking about people apparently being a passionate follower of it, you're talking about something that is heating up, increasing the tempo, pushing the intensity the heat of the channel of consciousness. And of course, under ordinary conditions, you just push it up. Life just allows it to be pushed up to the point that I'm almost having so much fun, I'm almost getting to a mystical state almost as much as I care to have. And miraculously, that is all that happens. Or I just fervently love the great leader of our church or our group, because I just know in some way the gods have selected him, or else he has more nerve. Because I can just feel, he didn't stop like me. He doesn't get up the edge and feel like he's about to go nuts or he's about to fly apart. It's obvious. He has transcended all that. And of course, those kind of leaders are always saying, you know, as God told me last night, or the last time I had a great mystical experience, or my big mystical experience when I was in Tibet back in '57. That I don't go that far, but God, it's good to have met him, because he says he has, and I even get a feeling he has. Or the minister that can always say, we are not living right, attempting to disturb the placid, that we're not doing what the gods want us to do, then the feeling always is that he is. Or else he wouldn't be standing there pointing the finger of accusation at us. You know, that's not the way God would work. See, that just shows how much they know about life. If you do anything to increase the temperature, or if you increase the tempo as crudely as I have and am now insinuating, along with these tasks of simply speaking louder, speaking with a fake intensity of, hey, have you ever heard of such and such book? Something will happen. Most of you know this by now. A lot of you can smile and almost feel it and look forward to it. Just make up. You don't even care what book. Just make up a title. But do not do it at the tempo. Do not do it with the same heat with which you would normally talk. Just pop your head around there or run in and slide up to the counter and say, have you ever heard of such and such book? Do you have it? Do you have it? You know, most of you know already what fun, but it's not just fun. It is a scientific reality. You open it up and you have more energy. It belies the ordinary level of physical law. You can move faster and you got more energy. You can talk faster and apparently feel, which the kind of talk, the example I just gave, you're feigning a kind of passion of like, do you have such and such book? Like, I'm dying. Do you have it? Do you have it? Do you have it? And something happens. Not just the fun, but you have got to see that this passion will open you up, and you can turn around and suddenly, maybe the person behind the counter or just a stranger standing there, maybe looking at you, something will hit. As many of you know by now, that something hits, something has happened to you, and it's no longer just the information coming in. A second, a moment, can be as good as 6 months of listening to me talk. When this channel is the same, and me making jokes, hey, the moon's full. The moon ain't fucking full. It's got nothing to do with astrology. Some of you that first get here, every time I use that joke or say, well, I think I'll quit tonight because the moon's full. And I see some of the new people make mental notes. Ooh, I knew there's something to astrology. I'm glad he agrees with me. There ain't shit to astrology. And the moon's not full. But there are times when the general channel here is almost frozen, that nobody wants to be heated up. And it's not just you all the time. I'll take part of the responsibility. At times I see what it takes for the night. I go for a while, and it's just the thing is not profitable anymore on that evening. But you need to see very soon, that is between now and next Thursday, that you can physically, all you got to do is do. I'm describing it simple enough, but now I'm telling you how it works. One description of it, a valid one, is you change either the tempo, and I'm using the obvious example of that, of increase the speed at which you move. Change the tempo. It doesn't matter whether you think you move fast or slow or not. It's all relative to somebody else. You have to make it relative to your own arbitrary wiring, the way your structures now work. It's increase the tempo, and you'll begin simultaneously to heat up molecular in here, and it will begin to expand. Or, on the other hand, you can apparently increase the heat itself, this kind of feigned passion, the intensity of it. It increases the tempo, it increases the molecular agitation of it. They're both the same thing. And it opens it up, and you can look around and begin to see. You begin to hear, you begin to feel things you did not do before. All right, let me ask you this, God damn it. Has it tonight, everything being relative, as all of you like to believe, but hasn't tonight been one of the better nights of the last few months? It seemed like something got across. What? Well, surely some of you noticed I have never been more animated, more passionate. My voice has not gone up and down. I have not talked as loud. This is probably the most animated show I have ever done. Now that you think about it, is that not right? I have done more moving. I've had my voice going up and down. I've done everything but take a Bible or a Koran and pound on the table. But I'm pointing out to you, you can do it yourself. You've got to do it yourself. If you do not open this up, you could be standing before the gods. You could be in front of, listening to the wisest man on this planet, and I've already given you every hint possible. Of course, I've tried to make it fairly palatable by simply saying there's nobody that understands anymore. But so what? If that channel is the same, if the system is going to operate at one intensity, at one tempo, at one temperature, everything that comes in, the sigma, the cosmic truth, instead of sigma, it'll come out over here, cosmic truth, L-phi, or M-I, Mary I. That, well, some of that I can agree with, some of it supports what I believe. And nothing's happened. You may think it was a fairly enjoyable talk. I enjoyed the book, but that's still not it. Nothing has finally slapped me into some super state. You can change everything. You can change your ability to process all information, energy, but you can only do it by increasing the molecular agitation in there, either through the two basic descriptions verbally, is through either increasing the tempo at which it operates or to raise the temperature on it. That will open it up. But note, everything is wired up in you and everyone else to keep it right where it is. Anything past that point is frightening, uncomfortable, more than I expected. Well, fuck all that. What do you mean more than you expected? Well, I've always been a shy type. I expected if I was going to do great work for the spirits that they would select me to maybe be a solitary monk and bake raisin bread. Well, let's see first if I get this wound up church going, and then if we got time to set up a bakery, maybe we'll set you in charge of that. There is one thing that will strike people, that if, although I made the joke about advertise the beginning of our church, that every night after the service, free beer and sex. You get them there, but people are going to show up. I kept warning you for the last few months when I kept pointing out showbiz and told you this is showbiz, the Pope is showbiz, the temples are showbiz, life is showbiz because it's a transfer of energy. And showbiz is just a narrow spectrum. Now, I was trying to use an example that you'll go out and spend money. Duran's showing up. Horowitz is showing up. Sinatra's going to be here. It's only $20 to get a ticket for a hard seat, crammed up with somebody. But, oh, I got to do it. And you go there, you and other people, and it's over. And people are applauding, and they're stomping their feet and saying, God, I'd have paid double for this. And what happened? Well, I heard a bunch of words. I heard some music came through there. So what happened? There was a transfer of heat. There was a transfer of energy that went on. But when you feel as though you got your money worth, you and everybody else, passion, the kind I'm talking about, there was a heating up, or there was an increase in the tempo that was beginning to push on this. Not enough to be disturbing. If it's getting to be disturbing, you'd have seen something like Sinatra sing all right for a while, and suddenly then he began to talk incoherently, and people begin to say, wait a minute, either the man's drunk or he's deranged, or I heard he was taking LSD a few years ago. It's a flashback. He begins to slobber at the mouth and stumble. It may still be old Blue Eyes up there, and everybody thinking, boy, he's my favorite entertainer, but something is getting past the point. There you go, hear a man going to do a lecture on self-improvement, and it sounds pretty good, and he talks for a while, and he begins to sweat, and his eyes get bigger and bigger. It was interesting for a while, but the goddamn man's about to lose his mind. He's about to fly to pieces. But without a kind of passion, without you beginning to heat up, beginning to agitate the molecular structure within bounds that no one has a definition for, but you can begin to see it. I know what it is. But you can begin to see it and then feel it. You push it up to the point that people are beginning to feel a little agitated. They almost feel a little passionate. They almost feel as though something unpredictable might happen. And then it stops, which is the way life has things arranged in the main. That is entertainment. That is showbiz. But note, in a sense, I started out without giving any busy passion, without creating imaginary enemies for us, for me, back where I started tonight, from a certain viewpoint. I have acted, I have presented, the methods I have used have almost been from a certain viewpoint, relative to everything else in ordinary life, almost dispassionate. And yet, a sizable number of people, whether you know it or not, now have the ability to think and to feel at times beyond the level of this channel of all of humanity. But for it to go any further, it has to go into the realm of fake passion, which is real passion. Are you about to run out of tape? Among other ways, but this is the best one up to date, because it wraps up many of the things that we have talked about, of the kind of questions that you people write and the kinds of questions that you still have. The primary one always being this, of course. How can I be as alert? How can I be as excited? How can I be as insightful all the time as I can some of these times, these moments, these flashes? Just tell me that. Just tell me that, and I'll give you everything I got. I'll do anything you want. Just tell me that. That's the only question I've got anymore. That's the only reasonable question. And you're right. It's how can I be as ignited? How can I get this thing going all the time the way it seems to go some of the time? That's all I want to know. Tell me that, and I won't ever bother you again. I know. The Sigma part, you got truckloads of it. You got backpacks full. It's just everywhere. Now, if you begin to open this up, as some of you are already doing, it's when the time is right. Is now you want to tell me, you write me little notes, and then, of course, I assume that you know what I'm doing by now. So it's not a surprise, but now it comes back that you people want to tell me that, ooh, last week, I suddenly remember something that you said. It's been over 2 years ago, and for some reason I can remember it was the third week in October. And it didn't make any sense. I wasn't even sure it was important. And suddenly the other day I looked around, or somebody said so-and-so, or I smelled so-and-so, I touched so-and-so, and suddenly it was. Because there's no longer garbage going in or sigma going in and coming out sigma, Fi, or Mi. I have done enough with you people that you know enough. You know more than is sufficient. You have heard more than sufficient. But if you do not change the tempo/temperature of what seems to be your own level of consciousness, things are not ever going to dramatically change. Just look back at your life even before this. People can say, we've covered this many times, and you've had every opportunity in the world to observe it, that people can say, I would love to change. I would love to do something exciting and meaningful in my life. I would like to be enlightened. I would like to be wakened from this stupor in which man lives. I would like to be doing the will of the gods. But they want to do it at the same damn tempo, at the same temperature at which they're operating now, and you simply must see it will not work. It's not supposed to work. That's part of the master stroke that life is doing through man, of people saying that, people insisting it's true. But you cannot light a fire under them past a point. You cannot try to push them along past a point because, well, hey, this is no longer fun. This is no longer profitable, or this is not what I had in mind. Don't bug me. Leave me alone. It's like everybody has sat down by the time you're grown in a rocking chair and you began to work for good old D. You began to recoil from life. You began to wilt. And you rock there at the same tempo. Everybody's, you could say, is a slightly different one, which is irrelevant. But you start rocking at this tempo, and you got your seat, and you do not want to be disturbed. It's not some kind of psychological problem. It's not a problem whatsoever with life as things arranged as they should be. But every dream you have that you'd like to see everything that I can see, that you'd like to be the most knowledgeable, perceptive person in the world. But things have got to run, you've never analyzed this way, but things have got to run at a certain tempo. And things have to have a certain intensity, and thus far I've been pretty good about it. You know, I hadn't shouted, and I hadn't screamed and demanded too much of people. I hadn't had you on the street corners handing out handbills, making up placards with my beautiful face on it and hollering, oh, yay from me. I hadn't been on the street corners grabbing people by lapels and saying, hey, do you know who I am? Do you believe in me? You know, thus far I've been pretty reasonable. Certainly not fighting in an emotional way, right? What can you do when you get outside this room other than to disturb the placid? They'll show up. And then to placate the disturbed. What else can you do? I'm talking about on the big meeting nights. I'm talking about on the general advertising, the general approach to larger numbers of people, regardless of what might be going on Wednesday or Thursday night. But as far as what seems to be the general invitation, the general workings of this organization, this church, this religion, this philosophy, this organization, what can you do besides that? And you cannot do either of the two necessary parts I've said to agitate the comfortable and then to comfort the agitated. You can't do either of those without passion. You can't tell those that are apparently just mechanically wounded, those that show up now in churches or psychiatrist's office, you can't just simply say, hey, look, let me describe to you how things are. And you start talking about their, you know, you tell me that you're worried about life, that nobody treats you right. Hey, look, fella, listen to me, Mac. Look at these pictures of people, children starving. And you're telling me that you're worried because women don't seem to be able to engage in a very close personal interrelationship to you, and they keep trying to get in your space. I want you to see, I have figures here, and you begin to pull out details, abstracts from the United Nations about how many children are starving to death in India and Pakistan. That will not comfort the afflicted, the wounded. You should know that. And by the same token, as much as some of the apparent ideas and maps I've drawn seem to excite you, it was not that. It was the expansion of this. And so you cannot attract people, no matter the degree of education, to in some way advertise this church is open, free sex and beer every night, but for admittance you must have at least a master's degree. And then get them there, and in a nice, reasonable way, and you people distill all these thousands and thousands of words I've said, and maps and descriptions and jokes, distill it all in a way and present to them in a nice, visually attractive, reasonable, and wait for them to all go, within several days, to go, oh my God, it's wonderful. I see it, it's wonderful. The placid have been agitated. the slumbering have been shaken. Do not, as the great mystics say, hold your breath. 3 minutes there. Not one more. I was going to say something about some people asking and sending me notes about some of the newer people, and I did not take offense because they were sincere, but they happened to use the term about some of the people in other cities now getting this on audio or videotape. I've had several people of late mention how interesting and how seriously they take my theories. Now, I've received that over a period of months, and I kept planning to say something about it. And so tonight, I sort of had in mind to say something about it, but I'll be damned, we're running out of tape, she said. So